Hi there. This is a recipe I've been wanting to try since I saw it on one of my favorite Facebook groups a few years ago. It's called Poor Man's Fruitcake, and it's a recipe that dates back to the Great Depression. It describes a cake made without any eggs or milk because those were expensive ingredients in those days, and a lot of people didn't want to waste them on luxuries like cake. Of course, the holidays are a time for having fruitcake, and so I wanted to give it a try here at Christmas and see how it turned out. I was quite happy with the results, as you'll be seeing now. There were a number of things about this recipe that I'd never seen before, such as the way we prepare the fruit for the fruitcake. This recipe doesn't use any alcohol the way a typical Christmas cake does, but it does use a lot of black coffee. The day before we make this cake, we prepare 3 cups of hot coffee and we melt in a whole cup of shortening. Once it's melted and mixed in, we add 2 cups of sugar and stir until the sugar is dissolved, then add 2 cups of raisins. And we then boil this for 5 minutes before adding it to a bowl and letting it chill overnight. The original recipe said to place it outside overnight, but at least here we can keep it in the refrigerator. The next day we prepare our dry ingredients by using a lot of flour. And to this we add cinnamon, ground cloves, ground allspice, salt, and baking soda. And now we bring out the fruit mixture. Boy, doesn't that look delicious? And all we do is mix it all together. This recipe doesn't use any eggs or milk because those were scarce during the Depression, but this made for a batter that seemed more like a dough than cake batter. And now we bring out a heavy cast iron cake pan. The recipe calls for the cake pan to be heavily greased and floured, though I like using a mixture called baker's goop, which uses equal amounts of flour, shortening, and cooking oil. And we brush on the baker's goop and coat every inch of the inside of the pan. Now we scoop in the cake mix. And this is what I meant when I said this cake batter had a consistency more like dough than cake batter. I'd never seen anything like this before, not even with Christmas fruitcake or plum pudding. And finally, something else I hadn't seen before now. The recipe says to put the cake pan into a cold oven and then turn the temperature to 350 degrees. I wasn't sure if this would work, but I had to trust the recipe. After an hour, I was surprised and very pleased to see the cake did indeed rise in the oven. The recipe said to bake for an hour and a half, but after an hour and 20 minutes, I had to check and see if it was done. Now let's see what the probe thermometer says. This has a long way to go, in fact. So be it. So the cake went back into the oven. 20 minutes later, we check it again. And it looks like we are just about done. Considering this is a hot iron pan, I figure this will bake for a few more degrees, and that means we will be done. And now we wait for 20 minutes before flipping the cake. Here we go. With that, a 1, a 2. Haha. Okay, move this over just a little bit. Can. All right. And now, as always, the moment of truth. Ha-ha! There we go! Ha-ha! Behold our poor man's fruitcake. Even though there were flour stains on the cake, I was glad it turned out so well. This was a very heavy cake, and it took over 4 hours to cool off completely. The recipe didn't say to prepare a glaze or frosting for the cake, but I wanted to make a sugar glaze to improve the look. I've had a lot of difficulty putting together a good cake glaze, even though I've made many attempts at it. I was determined to get it right this time, so I sifted the powdered sugar and weighed the ingredients before mixing them in. Mixing them together with a spatula, I did have to use an extra dash of milk to get to the right consistency. But it worked. I think this was my best cake glaze so far. And here is our poor man's fruitcake, a journey back in time to the days of my grandmother and possibly your great-grandmother. When the cake was sliced, I noticed it had a much more solid and dense look to it when compared to a modern-day cake. However, the cake was quite moist and very tender, and it had a spice cake aroma that was quite indescribable. And now the taste test. I'm not sure how to describe this, but I realize why the cake batter looked more like a dough and why it's so thick and heavy. This is more like a cookie dough than a cake batter because we made it with no eggs and no milk. But what's important is how it tastes. And this is a delicious spice cake of a kind I've never had before. It's miles away from a modern-day fruit cake or even a Christmas pudding, and while you can't exactly taste the coffee that was used in this, it combines with the spices to give us a flavor that's, well, unique. I'm glad I put a sugar glaze on this cake because the sugar really goes well with this. This recipe was made for people who couldn't afford fancy ingredients, and like those medieval dishes made by the peasant class, it takes these basic ingredients that the upper class would frown on and combines them into something that is, quite frankly, wonderful. As long as you're aware that this is very different from a fluffy cake made from modern-day box mix, I think you'll enjoy this a lot. It's not really expensive to make, and it's dense enough that even a small piece will certainly satisfy you. So I would indeed suggest giving this one a try and see for yourself if it's a cake to be served at a special occasion like Christmas. Personally, I'm giving it a thumbs up, and I'll be glad to serve this to my guests at Christmas or at any other time of the year. Thank you for watching.